If you take one step outside of rich person world, where everything is just fine, the first thing you notice is that people are really worried about the economy, not just the macro economy, the effect of monetary policy on the world, but their own personal economies. People in the United States are running out of money. Not the homeless, the middle class, even the upper middle class, they're running out of money. And now Christmas is here. So that's a huge problem because everything is more expensive. You've probably already seen how a typical $20 grocery list in 1990 would now cost you $72. That would have been $44 just last year. So 44 to 72 in 1 year, but it's actually worse than that. Since Joe Biden took office, the price of virtually everything you buy has skyrocketed. Bacon, up 24%. Eggs, 41%. Alcohol, 11%. Airfare, 42%. Heating oil, 20%. It goes on and on and on. And as the prices have gone up, so have credit card rates, up to 23% from 16%. So there's no denying that the country is poorer and far deeper in debt. How bad is it and what happens next? Now, most economists you see on television are busy telling you about the stock market. This is up, this is down. Most don't pay any attention to this, and the ones who do lie about it, by and large. Stephanie Pomboy does not. We trust her on these questions. She's the founder and president of Macro Mavens and joins us now for an overview. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on. So that was just a quick snapshot of where the average household is trying to buy staples to live. But if you wouldn't mind broadening it out a little bit, it feels like everything is much more expensive. That's true, correct?
Yes, it is. It is absolutely true, contrary to what other people on Wall Street and out of the administration might have you believe. I think, it's interesting for us to have this conversation now because I've spent the last 2 days doing business news media talking about the latest slew of inflation numbers. And in the background, you see the stock market on an absolute tear. Wall Street, the administration, the Federal Reserve are all taking a massive victory lap because these reported inflation numbers have slowed from 9% to just 3%. But as you outlined, Tucker, for the average American, the price of everything went up massively, and now it's just going up at a slightly less eye-watering pace. I mean, everything is usuriously expensive, and it's getting more expensive slightly slower. And so for them, this isn't cause for celebration. I would footnote, since you kind of led me there, that these numbers themselves are highly flawed. I mean, this will not shock you, Tucker, but because they're manufactured by the government, they tend to understate inflation, the reason being that all of the cost of living adjustments that things like Social Security are tied to and our tax payments are tied to are tied to this particular measure. So it behooves them to keep that number as low as possible. So in the real world, first off, inflation never peaked at 9. In the real world, it was probably 20%, and who knows what it really is now. Just by way of example, this latest inflation number that came out reported a 33% decline in healthcare insurance year over year. I don't know about you, but I think my healthcare insurance is probably up about that amount this year. So these numbers are complete nonsense. And then I would go on, if I may, to just highlight that the real problem is not only has the price of goods gone up, but income growth hasn't kept pace. And this has been a major issue. For comparison, under Biden, real disposable income, which is your income after taxes, adjusting for that government measure of inflation, so not even real world inflation, has declined $800 billion. Just for comparison, under Trump, it rose 4.3 trillion. So, I mean, this is a massive hole for households. And what are they doing? They're borrowing, as you mentioned, at 23% credit card rates just to keep up. Net interest payments for households have doubled since Biden took office and are now the highest level of income since the global financial crisis, the Great Recession in 2008. So long story short, Tucker, yes, households are seriously struggling in a way that we haven't, frankly, seen in decades.
So at some point, people won't be able to pay. I mean, it's harder than ever to get a home equity loan, I notice. People are going to run out of ways to raise money. They can't force their own wages up. So they're going to be putting much more of their expenditures on credit cards. It feels like they already are. What's the default rate? Are we seeing a rise in that on credit card debt?
Well, this is sort of classic Wall Street analysis. The default rate hit very low levels during this COVID stimulus spectacular when the government was sending checks to people's mailboxes, and people actually cleverly paid down debt with a lot of that money. So the default rates hit these incredibly low depressed levels. And now we're starting to move higher. And so the numbers have moved up sharply and are now kind of back to where they were following that global financial crisis. But everyone sort of takes comfort that they're just normalizing from the prior levels. So this is all nonsense. I mean, they're already moving up very rapidly back to those prior recession levels. And I think on their way much higher because, as we just talked about, incomes aren't keeping up. The inflation numbers are, really fraudulent. So households are struggling and they are running up credit card debt, which is just mind-boggling given that they have to pay 24% interest. Another thing that they're doing, which is new and, really novel to me, not something I would ever consider, but these buy now, pay later programs that, if you go to Home Depot and you buy a saw, you can buy now, pay later, and it's essentially a layaway plan. These businesses are absolutely booming, but the non-payment rate on these things is massive. The last time I saw a statistic, it was like 20 or 30% of people who put things on layaway don't even make the first payment on it. So there's going to be hell to pay eventually when all this comes home to roost.
So the main source of ready cash for people is credit cards. And if they're charging 24%, and that debt cannot be discharged through bankruptcy, thanks to Joe Biden's work on behalf of the credit card companies in the Senate. And they, of course, bought his house for him and gave his son a job in exchange for that. But I'm wondering, why is there no conversation about the credit card companies? If I'm in the mafia and I charge 24% interest, I'm a loan shark and I go to jail. But the credit card companies are not treated as criminals, which obviously they are. They're treated as heroes. When do we get the national conversation about anyone who lends money at 24%?
It's interesting, Tucker, because they have really clamped down on the payday loan guys,
right.
Which really, their rates were around 24%. So it's now you wonder, what's the difference, you don't want, I was going to say you don't want to get too cynical, but you really have to about which big credit card companies are in, have effective lobbying in with Washington. I mean, clearly, this is just like the big bank cartel. The big credit card companies. In fact, the banks and the credit card companies are largely one and the same anymore. So I think maybe that answers your question right there.
I wonder if, if a huge percentage of the population stopped paying their credit card bills, what could they do about it?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're going to get an answer to that question soon. We are seeing delinquency rates go up. So people are running up debt on these credit cards and they're not paying it. And I think the way push will come to shove is that it's going to reverberate through the financial markets as these losses mount. And as you and I have talked about previously, back when Silicon Valley Bank failed, it's not like the banks are in ship shape right now either, because they're sitting on massive losses on their security holdings. So once these loan losses start to pick up on credit cards and everything else, commercial real estate, et cetera, they're going to have a real problem. And when we get a problem in the financial system, policymakers